Welcome. I'm the Frail Blaze. Our story today. Last week I lost my voice. Something else found it. I grew up in the city, so of course I was eager to see new and interesting places. As soon as I turned 18, I was out the door and traveling across the country. In the end, though, the thing that I wanted most was the peace and quiet that I couldn't find in a city. That's how I ended up working at this small bar in a Montana town at 19 years old. As I said, the town is pretty small, mostly just bars and a few stores. Ever since I moved here last month, I always found the library to be interesting. The old architecture makes the place look surreal, and on top of that, I'm an avid reader. I've actually been meaning to write a book, maybe make some money from it. So last week, I visited the place, hoping for some inspiration, if not at least some reading material. Nobody was inside, which I thought was weird, considering it was located in a pretty busy part of the town. I looked around a bit and I saw a girl around my age in an office chair. She was reading a Stephen King novel. I can't remember which one. "Do you work here?" I asked, tentatively. "Work here? I own the place," she said, jolting upwards. "Oh, wow, but you're only 19, she said. "Yeah, my aunt left it to me. I was the only reader in the family, besides herself, so we were pretty close." She put her hand out. "I'm Kat." "Oh, I'm Leo," I said. "Sorry I didn't see you there sooner. I don't usually see many people in here this time of the week. It's not a town of readers, particularly. The library gets most of its money from people buying and renting DVDs on Friday." Sure enough, there were several stands full of DVDs for the latest and greatest movies. Those weren't why I was here, though. "Say, I've been thinking of writing a novel. I was hoping I could find some inspiration here. A passion for reading? Let alone writing? You must not be from here, are you? Well, what is it you're planning on writing, then?" "I suppose I've always been a big horror fan," I replied. "I'd love to write something scary." "A horror fan," she said. "Me too. If you're looking for inspiration..." Yes, there's a section over there that contains all kinds of books about witchcraft, demons, all the real fun stuff. I'm not meant to touch them too often, though. They're really old, but I wouldn't want to touch them anyway." "Why not?" I asked, interested in what she had to say. "Well, see, I don't get scared easily. I'm fine with reading scary stories and watching scary movies. It's been that way since I was a little girl. But something about those old books just gives me the heebie-jeebies." That was exactly what I was looking for. I thanked Kat and walked to the section containing the creepy old books. "Be careful with them. As I said, they're really old. If they get damaged, there'll be hell to pay," she shouted across the library. Of course, I chuckled, grabbing one of the books. The cover was a faded red, and the pages were yellowed. It had no title. I began flicking through pages. Eventually I landed on a page with a creepy drawing. A face smiling, but with wide, frightened eyes. As I said, it's really creepy. But I love creepy stuff. So I made the mistake of reading the text, which I will not share with you for soon-to-be obvious reasons. As soon as I was done reading it, I gasped, then had a burning sensation in my throat and jaw as it hung open. I stayed like that for 10 seconds at least before stumbling backwards. My breathing was unsteady, and I stumbled towards the exit. Kat looked up from her book again, then became concerned when she saw me, but I just told her that my inhaler was in the car and that I'd come back tomorrow. My voice came out as a whisper, but it was enough for her to get back to her book. I hurried home, and though my breathing had become relaxed, my voice was completely gone. I tried to talk to myself in the mirror, but nothing came out. The book is meant to be really old. Maybe I had gotten sick by touching it or inhaled some really old dust or something. I made the probably ill-advised decision to sleep it off. My alarm woke me up for work, and I went to the bathroom to brush my teeth, but I found that I couldn't open my mouth at all. Hell, I couldn't even move my tongue. As panic began to settle in, I spoke. I was saying things. It was my voice, but it was not me saying those things. Something was controlling my mouth, forcing it to say. You invited me in. Yesterday evening you read from the book. Be aware I am in control of not just your speech, but your respiration. If you try to communicate about this to anyone, or if you don't do as I desire, I will stop breathing for you. Or perhaps I'll just bite clean through your tongue. I showed up to work on time, thankfully. I must have been a sight, pale as a ghost for sure. But I was still talking as confidently as ever. More confident than normal, even. Whatever was using my voice was remembering the names of every bar-goer and keeping them entertained as the part of me that I could control was serving them drinks. I left, got in my car, and then the voice told me to go to the library. It was Friday, so there were a few people there looking at the DVD shelves, but I walked over to Kat. "Leo, how are you? You looked kind of sick when you left yesterday," she said with concern in her voice. "Oh, I'm better for seeing you. I think there was just some old dust in that book. Got me sick for a day," I responded casually. "Say, mind if I take that book home, have a little look at it? I think it has some great material for a horror novel." I don't know, Leo," she said. "I meant to keep that old thing mostly untouched, and if it's gonna make people all sick for a day, I don't think I should be letting people near it." "Okie dokie," I grinned at her. Then I whispered so that only I myself could hear it. "Go grab some horror DVDs." I obliged, taking 2 in each hand and walking back to Kat. "Say, you're a horror fan, ain't you?" I smiled. "Sure, I don't scare very easily, though," she said. My smile grew wider as I said, "Say, I'll be watching a few of these here horror movies tonight. Want to come over to my place tonight and watch them with me?" She took me up on the offer, and I headed home to get ready. I was beginning to seriously worry. Whatever was controlling my smile and my voice had to have something planned for her, and I doubt it was anything good. Still, I did want to continue breathing. She arrived at 9 p.m., and I went to turn on the movies. The movies I was told to grab were the Evil Dead films. My mouth possessor was not without a sense of humor, it seems. We sat on the couch for 2 hours like that, laughing at the movies and getting increasingly, incredibly drunk. Even while I was afraid to move from the couch, and my voice was sweet-talking her. At around 11 p.m. we were both plastered, though I got the sense that whatever was controlling my voice was focused on something, despite my speech being slurred. It was at this point that she leaned in for a kiss. Whatever the thing was controlling my mouth obliged. As soon as our lips touched, however, I felt the same burning sensation in my throat that I had felt when I read from the red book. And my eyes opened wide. Judging from Kat's eyes, I would guess she was feeling the same feeling in her throat. We both fell backwards, and I heard her breathing become unsteady. My jaw hung open for a while, until I realized that I was in control of my breathing again, and by extension, my speech. Are you all right there, Cat? I slurred out, still very much inebriated. Yeah, just tired. Really, really tired, she responded. Her voice came out as a whisper. She fell asleep on the couch, and I passed out drunk on the floor. When I woke up, I could hear her voice coming from the bathroom. Be aware, I am in control of not just your speech, but your respiration. If you try to communicate about this to anyone, or if you don't do as I desire, I will stop breathing for you, or perhaps I'll bite clean through your tongue. I had transferred it to her. I ran to the bathroom, and I puked in the toilet, partially out of sheer panic, mostly because I was hungover. Thanks, Leo. We should do this again sometime. I looked up to see Kat, grinning, but with fear written all over her eyes. Grab your keys and go home, she said. This time it was to herself. After that, I tried to figure out why I wanted her instead of me. After I sobered up, I realized she owns the library. She has access to those books. Kat is in some very serious danger. And who knows how many more people will be if she's forced to read more of those books by whatever the hell that thing is. Welcome to the Frail Blaze. Today's story. In this village, December is the scariest month of the year. Tonight, I have a wonderful opportunity to share some local folklore with the world. These old stories are often unsettling, of course, but they sometimes hide a lesson that folk would do well not to forget. Unfortunately, those like my mother, who don't know English and has never used a computer, are often the only ones to still remember. She's sitting down in front of a tall red candle now, which means the tale is about to begin. I will type and translate as she speaks, and I can't imagine a better environment for this dark winter fable. The cabin is quiet, and outside are only snowdrifts, pine forests, and icy mountain tops beneath a starry night sky. And so, without further ado, The Outsider's Tale. Hundreds of years ago, this village was a very different place than it is today. Each person had their place in it. There were butchers, bakers, candlestick makers, blacksmiths, grocers, coopers, and carpenters. Folk supported each other because they depended on each other. They understood, like the spider understands, that if one strand of the web fails, the dinner escapes. And who wants to go hungry? That also meant that neighbors kept a close eye on each other, since one person's sin was the sin of the whole community. And that is how our story begins. One winter's day, an outsider came to the village. Suddenly, there was a new person in town, one who had no place. She came up the winding road in a covered wagon, fleeing death and danger. She needed help, but folk are suspicious of outsiders. She had to find a way to support herself until summer, when the snow would melt, and she could cross the mountain pass. She tried playing music in the local tavern, but the barkeep turned her out. He was sorry, he said, but the wives in town didn't like the way their husbands looked at this outsider. She tried working the looms and storehouses, but the outsider's hands were delicate, and she did not know the language of the village. She couldn't share in their gossip, which made her a threat. They turned her out as well. Snow piled up on her cold, covered wagon. The outsider took on the most disagreeable jobs in order to survive. She mucked stables, swept streets, and cleaned houses for next to nothing. But it still wasn't enough to provide food and warmth for the winter. She resorted to meaner things: fortune-telling, potion-selling, card scams. And each night the men of the village snuck over to the covered wagon with a pitiful handful of coins. They brushed their steps out of the snow with a pine branch to protect their reputations. But everyone knew what was happening in the outsider's covered wagon. One of these men was different from the others. He was the butcher, and he brought gifts of food and fuel instead of coins. It wasn't clear what he was after. Maybe he just wanted someone to talk to, because he wasn't happy with the village either. The butcher and the outsider grew close, and they made plans to leave the village together as soon as the passes cleared. Rumors traveled fast in the village. The butcher's family and friends were furious about his plot to abandon them. What right did he have to abandon his place in the village? Folk depended on him. It could not be allowed, and they knew the outsider was to blame. They did not know that the butcher was with the outsider on the night they set flame to her covered wagon. He came out in his shirt sleeves to stop them, and things got violent. The butcher was left in a pool of his own blood beside the burning wagon, and the outsider ran, screaming into the mountains and into the night. There was no food or shelter in those freezing high places, and the outsider was no survivalist. She did the best she could, digging a branch-covered tunnel to sleep in, eating roots and berries, but the berries made her sick, and soon the outsider realized she was going to die. But she could not allow that to happen. It was already obvious when she looked at her shivering, starving belly. The outsider carried the butcher's child in her womb. A desperate madness took hold of the outsider. She climbed to the top of a twisted peak, and there, surrounded by the howling winds and absolute darkness of a new moon's winter night, she called upon any power that could hear her. She offered everything and asked for only two things in return: life and revenge. Well, something out there must have been listening, because she was granted both. The outsider and her kin would live, but on the opposite side of the cycle. The folk in the village craved warmth and light. The outsider and her kin would thrive in the dark and cold. The folk of the village grew old and dreaded death. The outsider and her kin would age slowly and fear no mortal weapon. The folk of the village felt hunger and thirst. The outsider and her kin would need nourishment but once a year, and it would come from the flesh of the living. And so it was, and is. When the winter nights are longest, the outsider and her kin come down from the frozen peaks to hunt. It is always a mystery who their prey will be. It might be a foolish, misbehaving child who didn't heed his mother's warning to come inside at dark. Cold hands that grab his neck from behind are the last thing he ever feels. It might be a stubborn farmer out fixing his fence by the dark tree line. A scream, fingernails dragging in the frosty dirt, and he's gone, swallowed up by the shadows under the trees as though he'd never even been born. Or it might be someone special who the outsiders have stalked in the night for many moons. The folk of this village aren't always eaten when they're caught. That would be too messy. Some are dragged away by the outsiders for breeding purposes, to create more of their own kind. Others are just used for sport. After they've served their purpose, the glacial caves keep their meat fresh all year long. The village has changed since the outsider first arrived in her covered wagon. There are electric lights and metal towers, plastics, escalators, and wireless internet. The village has grown, but the folk are very much still the same. Pray for those outsiders. And so, every year, when the days grow shorter and the nights are cold, the people of this village stay indoors after sunset. Folk lock their doors, shutter their windows, and light a tall red candle in remembrance of their sin. Folk try to forget about all the people who go missing this time of year, because the outsiders are always there, full of life and full of revenge. So ends the tale. My mother blows out the candle that the inhabitants of this cabin had lit, foolishly thinking it would protect them from us. We have feasted well, but we must go now. It is nearly dawn. Perhaps I'll have another story to tell when we come down again to feed next year. And I suppose, since you've been sitting there being all nice and whatever, I'll give you your third story immediately. This one's slightly longer than the others, but hey, you're here for it. This one is called It Hides Among the Trees. I like that title. The smell of decay is a unique one. It's unlike anything else you'll ever experience. It's a smell that you can't wash away from a crime scene. It's a smell that sticks with you if you're ever unlucky enough to experience it. It triggers a fearful instinct in some, morbid curiosity in others, and for some sadomasochistic individuals, a little bit of both. It could be a body, an animal, a human, maybe something else. It could be roadkill or a murder scene. It could be relatively fresh or nearly mummified. And in some local legend, it's the smell that marks doom for any soul damned to such a fate. My name is not important, for I fear how telling this story will make me sound, well, absolutely insane, and frankly, I don't want that linked to me. But for the sake of introductions, I'll take up the pseudonym Ethan. This story takes place when I was only 17 and about to graduate high school. Scariest of all. By now, I'm 23. I have moved, partially based on the following events, and have finished college. I've started working as a crime scene investigator. A recent case brought this memory to the forefront of my mind, and I realized that I never got the chance to tell anyone back when it first happened. I was admittedly afraid of getting into serious trouble. I still am, but that's what's good about the anonymity of the internet, right? And I guess that traumatized part of me still hopes that somebody from the area or surroundings has had this experience with it, or at the very least can believe me. That's all it can really be described as, unless of course you're from the area and you know it by name. The Faranock. Hi, my name is Ethan. I'm from Illinois, specifically Sycamore County. Go Coyotes, right? Well, in my teenage years, I've seen my fair share of crazy shit. And if I were here for this, I could go on for hours about my experiences. But one in particular rises above the rest, and that's the one that I want to talk about. Growing up, I never really had much stability. I was the oldest of 3 siblings raised by a single mother who passed away when I was just 8. My little siblings were 5 and 3. We were put into custody of our aunt, who never really was around that much. I found myself, more than her, being the one helping to make ends meet, at least as far as my siblings were concerned. My only real escape from that responsibility was school, and in junior high to high school, I spent any chance I could with my friends. We were a pretty wild pack back then, at least compared to how I've since turned out. We often explored abandoned buildings, spray-painted trains, vandalized police cars, teenager stuff. And being annoying nuisances of kids, we not only got into trouble, but we did the typical kid thing of spreading spooky urban legends as if they were true rumors. And for a while, that's all I thought the Fairnock was. It's been a tall tale for as long as I can remember. Even as a little kid, I distinctly remember even hearing adults talking about it. No doubt, the stories had a profound impact on the local culture. You rarely saw anyone out after the streetlights had come on, especially not in the area I lived in, which was thoroughly surrounded by woodlands. Not really rural, but there were a good few hunting districts in the area because of the little mini patches of woods that made up a good part of the scenery. Some were hiking trails, and the biggest of them was a huge park, and the rest were hunting ranges and just nothing at all. If you did see people out after the sun began to set, you would never see them alone. At the very least, they'd always have at least one person with them, usually clinging to each other for dear life. For us, this was our Mothman. Everyone and their mother's dog had a story about the Fairnock. This was such a prominent thing in our local culture that the curfew in place was specifically designed in consideration to this threat. It was a creature that thrived off of fear. It uses humans' natural, curious nature to lure them in, string them along an increasingly more morbid trail of sights until their fear was so intense that it could strike and feed. I'm getting a bit low on light here. There we go. So that it could strike and feed. And make no mistake, this creature was ruthless. Easy to survive if you were smart enough to just not act on your curiosity. But if you weren't, as long as you had the foresight to quit investigating while you were ahead, you might be okay. After all, the creature fed off of fear. If you didn't give in to this bait, it wouldn't mangle and devour whatever was left of you when it was done. Like the beast. And the way it lured people in was the fabricated scent of decay and the expertly timed rustling of bushes or tree leaves to get your attention and get you in on its macabre trail and lead you right into the belly of the literal beast. Of course, this was a tale so absurd. Why would a group of angsty teens ever heed any warning? Why would they follow the curfew inspired by a presumably faux threat that there was too much opportunity to mess around when no one was outside and had eyes on you? Not even police got out after curfew because of the beast. Well, as you may have guessed, my friends and I were angsty teens who thought we were too good to listen to the stories and follow the curfew. Rebellious angsty teens in a horror story. This can't end well. It was a Friday in October, nearing the end of the month, at the peak of fall, with winter rearing its ugly head just around the corner. My friends, who, for the sake of this story, we'll call Spencer and Adam, and I, were hanging out after school. We always hung out in a small cafe down the road from the school until it closed at 6, and we were ultimately shooed off. It was the weekend, and we didn't feel like calling it a day just yet. Spencer was itching for trouble, as he had just recently gotten ungrounded, and he wanted to make up for lost time. Naturally, Adam and I were on board. Why wouldn't we be? There was nothing else to do after all. So we hopped on our bikes and rode around town doing what we always did, looking for creepy or otherwise unsettling shit to stick our noses into and vandalize whatever we felt like on the way. Eventually the sun had set, and it was a little past 8 o'clock, meaning curfew had already been enacted. Of course, the police only patrolled until 8:15, and after that it was free reign for us. You know, there's one thing we haven't done before, Adam suggested as we biked to the park. Spencer and I both looked at him when I piped up with, "What, murder someone?" The question was meant sarcastically, and they both knew that. And Adam snorted in amusement. "No," he said. "We haven't explored the woods at night. We're already biking to the park. There's a hiking trail right there." Meaning, the expectant trail off caused Spencer to light up with excitement, already knowing what was being suggested. "Oh shit. We haven't looked for that, what was it called? The thing that eats people by luring them into the woods with dead smell or whatever. Ethan, you know what it is, don't you?" he asked, glancing over at me. Before I could answer, Adam chimed in enthusiastically. "Farinock, yeah, that's what I'm talking about." And I nodded in agreement. "Right, well, what's stopping us? I have my phone, and it's nearly fully charged, so at the very least we have a flashlight and a way to call for help if the boogeyman comes out of the trees to come get us." This caused us all to laugh. For some reason, we found it hilarious to poke fun at the whole thing. Well, no, I guess it wasn't just for no reason. It was because we were teenagers. Going against the status quo was just what we did. Now, they're very adamant on the foolish teenager angle on this one. As we made it to the park and biked through until we had made it to the trail, I distinctly remember all three of us agreeing to split up. Always a wonderful idea in every story I've ever read. I can't exactly remember how that part of the conversation went, but we made good on our word, and we did just that. We split up when we got there. Nothing says an evening with friends like not being with your friends. But I'll just read. We made it to the trail, climbed off our bikes, and let them fall to the ground in a careless pile, so excited at the prospect of exploring a new territory. We were the very thing the Farinock preyed on, curious humans who acted a lot tougher than they were. It didn't help that we were stupid kids at the time, and all self-preservation was overshadowed by the adrenaline rush of exploring the woods at night after being fed what to us was like the equivalent of a campfire ghost tale. We looked at each other, me pulling up my phone for light. Spencer glanced down and laughed. I think I'm going to traverse along the trail until something happens. I've got my phone, but the trail has a few scattered lights here and there, so I'll be fine. "It'll save battery," he said. Adam and I looked at each other and nodded. "Okay, cool. I guess we'll just explore either side of the woods then." I suggested to Adam, and he just shrugged. "Fine by me," he responded. That was when we split up. As stupid as it was, sure, at the time we thought it was all a folk tale. But even if it had been, splitting up was still stupid. There were animals in the woods that could easily hurt us, and I guess we thought we were big and bad because we had our phones. But I really can't say I remember what was going through my head at that point in time. So I set off into the woods, my phone's flashlight sweeping the area around me. The only sound I had being the ambience of the wind gently blowing through the leaves of the trees and bushes around me, and the chirping crickets, or cicadas. I'd be lying to say I could tell the difference, and I still can't. For a while, nothing happened. I walked through the woods, phone in hand, looking for anything interesting. The most notable thing I found up to that point was a cigarette carton with 2 unsmoked but broken cigarettes in it, and someone's old frisbee. It was sun-bleached and weathered, so I could tell it had been there for quite some time. After about 20 minutes of absolutely nothing, I decided this was boring, and I was getting pretty cold. I was ready to call it a night and to go home. But then, as I went to call Spencer, I smelled it. A foul stench of decay singeing my nose, bringing tears to my eyes. It was such a flooring smell, something that at that time I had never smelled before, and it was horrendous. There's truly been nothing else in my life that compared to it. Ironically, though, despite the Faranoch being the whole reason I was in the woods in the first place, that wasn't my first thought. My first thought was that I was bored, and I want to get pictures of what I presumed to be a carcass. Yeah, as morbid as it was, that was my thinking process. At the time, all I could think about was how gnarly it would be to have a photo of whatever this might be. I knew I could get into some serious trouble, but I didn't care. I was a nosy 17-year-old. All that mattered to me was the shock value. So, despite my growing repulsion and feeling nausea churning in my stomach, I followed the horrid scent. I tried calling Spencer for real this time, but he didn't pick up. I just assumed he either had his ringer off or was being too brave to answer his phone, wanting to feel as alone as possible on his adventure. That might seem like a stretch, but that's just how he was. So, at first, it didn't really bother me that much that he didn't answer. It was when I started hearing what sounded like the rustling of something in the bushes around me, something big, that I actually remembered why I was there. And then I hesitated to keep going. Unfortunately, whatever sense that had come through to the surface for long enough for me to hesitate was overpowered by my stubborn curiosity. So I trekked on. And it was not pleasant when I did. The first thing I saw was a small animal skull that was almost completely cleaned, but the bone was still stained red from blood. I thought about picking it up and taking it with me, but for some reason I just didn't. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe whatever was possessing me to be so reckless back then decided to sit this one out. It was probably for the best. I kept going, and there were even more animal bones. Eventually, entire animal carcasses. Way too many to be right, though. Too many to be normal. They were all decaying, covered in filth and maggots, and the stench was absolutely terrible. So terrible that I didn't even bother to stop and take any pictures. I was already nearly overwhelmed by the initial smell of decay I was following that was getting stronger. I didn't need more, and as I continued, the trail of death just kept getting worse. Eventually, when I started seeing more, bigger bones, I knew they weren't from any animal. Not only were they too big, but no animal has a human skull or hands. When I saw that human skull, my heart sank. I knew I'd made a terrible misjudgment. Before I could call Spencer or Adam, I heard the rustling again. The smell of decay was now so strong. I knew that if I went even one step further, I was a goner. As I went to shine my flashlight over the rustling bushes, it flickered and went off. Shit, I murmured, checking to see if I had it turned on. I did. It just wasn't working. I was too scared to input my phone's password, and with trembling hands, that's when I saw it. 2 piercing red eyes staring at me from the darkness. And they were rising, first to my eye level, which was 5'11" at the time, so that was already impressive for some beast or unknown animal in the woods. But then it went beyond. This thing had to be at least 7 feet tall. My heart practically leapt into my throat when I saw a full mouth of rows of sharp, long, yellow, glinting teeth in the subtle moonlight. As my eyes adjusted to having no flashlight, I saw its face. It was horrible. I can't even properly describe it in words. Its head was long and its mouth protruded in a way it shouldn't have. Its red eyes were sunken in, and its face was thin and hollow. Its skin was so pale it was almost white, and it probably would have been if it weren't for the dirty, dingy, gray hue that it had over top of it. This was the Faranok. It was a thin, lanky, grotesque being, and suddenly it made so much sense how it thrived off of fear. And how could anyone not be afraid of it? Instinct kicked in, and I bolted off running back the way I had come. I didn't exactly memorize the path, but I didn't care. I told myself that I'd keep running until I made it out. And I did. I ran and didn't turn around even for a second. I'm glad I didn't, because I could hear its heavy, fast footsteps. It sounded like it was on all fours, which was even more disturbing when I inevitably painted a mental image of it. Maybe that was a good thing, though, because I ran even faster, fearing for my life, faster than I've ever run, ever before or since. I could hear its heavy, strained panting and its menacing growl for a long time as I ran. I was easily running for longer than 15 minutes before the noises stopped. I didn't care that they had. I had to get out of there. I kept running and running and running, and I didn't turn around until I finally emerged by the road leading to the park entrance. My phone's flashlight had come back on, and I hadn't even realized it until I stopped running. Once I was out of the woods, I finally turned around. I had expected to still see the beast, but I didn't, and I was undeniably relieved. Quite lucky for stories like these. Quickly, and still trembling, I tried to call Spencer and Adam, but neither of them picked up. I had to have tried calling for a total of 40 times, but no one ever answered. Although I didn't have any solid proof, deep down, I knew what had happened. There was no denying it. I knew I needed to get home. So, staying along the illuminated path, I made my way back to the park where my bike was laying. And I picked it up. As I leaned up with it, something just told me that I needed to look up right then. And I'll never forget what I saw. Adam's mangled corpse was barely visible on the outskirts of the side of the woods he had gone into. It was clear he tried to run, but he didn't make it. The sight was so disturbing that I dropped my bike and doubled over, vomiting. His body was covered in what was easily all his own blood. His limbs were dislocated and bent at unnatural angles. His flesh was torn right through in many spots, and his clothes were shredded to rags. I never saw or heard from Spencer after that night, but I knew that he must have suffered a fate similar to Adam's, and it made me sick to think about it. It still does. When I could breathe again, I quickly hopped on my bike and rode back to my aunt's house. She, thankfully, wasn't home until much later, so I never had to explain to her where I was all night. I never told anyone what happened to Spencer or Adam, or even myself that night. There were a lot of reasons behind that, but the main one was fear. From that day forward, I was never sticking my nose where it didn't belong. I learned a lot of things that night, a lot of things I shouldn't have. The Faranok was much more than a tall tale. It really was a very serious threat. While all of the stories might not have been true, I knew what happened to me that night, and my friends. I know when the missing posters went up. I know how torn apart the community was. I know what happened to me, and I know what happened to my best friends, and I never doubted when people warned me after that about anything. Whatever warning I was ever given, I made sure to heed them. No part of me could relive those events. I moved out as soon as I turned 18. I moved far away, and I never looked back. I got accepted into a college in Michigan, and I focused on my career. I buried myself in my work so I never had to remember what happened on that horrible night in October. I made a new life, and for a while, I thought I got away from it. I got a new job. I got a girlfriend who I'm planning to propose to this summer, and she's due to have our first child in a few months. But when I got called to a scene a few miles from where I'd been staying, the state of the body was something no one was expecting. No one except me. It was a teenager, about my age at the time of the incident, and her corpse was brutalized in the same horrible way that Adam's had been. The fact that her body had been found in the woods behind her family home made one thing all too clear to me. I was never supposed to get away from the Faranok that night. It followed me here. I hate people who beg for food, money, and clothes. I hate begging in general, and you can rightly assume that I don't give anything to charity. I despise those who keep begging for assistance, and I come from a place where one had to work for absolutely everything they had. It should be made illegal to beg, and those who do beg should be sent to prison. It just touches me the wrong way when someone begs me for whatever reason they need or want. I hate begging, and I despise beggars. Those that beg should be killed off. There should be no begging in the 21st century. In past eras, they imagined the 21st century to be a utopia of some sort, but this century has so far just been a disappointing era. I have this woman that keeps begging for money every single day, and it's really starting to irritate me. Every day she begs for money, and I say no. But my tone is getting angrier. She thinks that because she is a woman, it would bring her some more luck than if she were a man. All men and women must learn to stand on their own 2 feet, and it is important that struggle is felt everywhere. This woman always asks me for money when she sees me. Then a boy comes up to me and begs me for food and clothes. I have a little respect for the boy, as he's asking for clothes and food instead of money itself, but those things still require money. I start to get angry at the little boy, and he keeps nagging me for certain items. This little boy thinks that because he's young, he should get something for it. I know how these beggars work, too. I'm no fool. I can see their begging network at play. It's disgusting. I would rather starve and die than ever be like them. Then that damn woman comes back to me, and this time she's bringing even more ammo for the begging fight. She has a baby in her arms, and she's begging for money with the baby in her arms. I was furious. I was furious at what she was trying to do, and I will not fall prey to her scheme. That baby is a weapon, and such shameless acts shouldn't be accepted in this society. Then the little boy comes to aid the baby-carrying woman. I knew they were working together, and I was disgusted. I truly was. I tell them to come with me into a room, and once I have them in there, I take out my pistol, and I shoot them dead. Now I've got to figure out what to tell the police about killing my own family. The police don't seem to have any problems with a man's own family begging them for money, food, and water. Disgusting. This story's called We Went Hiking in Mountain Lion Territory and ran into something much worse. The sun had set by the time we parked at the trailhead. We had 3 miles to go before we reached camp, meaning the bulk of our trek would be in the dark. Despite the danger of mountain lions, Kurt brushed off my suggestion to start early the next morning. We'll just keep talking and stick together. They only pick off stragglers. And so we went. Our visibility dwindled until I could scarcely see beyond the edge of our path. Snapping twigs and rustling brush punctuated the brief gaps in our conversation. After a particularly loud crack, I whipped around, searching for the source of the noise. My light fell on something wrong. Just beyond the tree line, it looked like an enormous buck, dripping with black tar. Hairless gray skin clung to an emaciated frame. John? Millie called from ahead of me. I turned my light forward to find my friends were almost out of sight. Keep up, or your cougar food. When I looked back, the deer was gone. After 4 hours of walking, we made camp nearby, beside a snow-melt lake. I kindled the fire, tending to it long after my friends retired to their tent. Each time the flames fell low, a pair of red eyes danced in the dark, glowing like the embers before me. When I added another log, the presence would retreat from view. Exhaustion eventually overtook me. John! Kurt shook me awake by the shoulders. Millie is gone. Did you see her? I jumped to my feet. How long has she been gone? Well, it couldn't have been... He grabbed my arm and froze. Listen. On strained ears, I heard the sloshing footsteps of someone wading through shallow water. We raced each other down the embankment until we spotted her standing thigh-deep in the inky water. Millie! Kurt hollered. She turned to look up at us a moment before a second figure came into view. the gray-skinned deer from down the trail, now standing on 2 legs. The beast placed a hoof on her shoulder, leading her deeper. Kurt called her name again, dashing after her. By the time we reached the water, Millie and the buck both disappeared beneath the surface. The sheriff didn't believe our version of events, of course. Kurt and I slept days in a cell until the search party could dredge out the lake and comb the area. Of course, this turned up nothing. Millie Palmer simply vanished that night. But the creature shepherding her into the depths didn't. It checks in on me often. On empty streets or secluded trails, the location seems not to matter so long as it's sufficiently dark and there's water somewhere nearby. Each sighting, my pursuer grows closer, bolder. My questions grow as well. If I'd let the fire die, would it have taken me that night? And what will happen once it does finally catch me alone in the dark? This one is called The Ultimate Guide on How to Attract and Be Worshipped by Women. I'm sure this will be very serious. He stalked the stage, staring at the crowd filling the auditorium. Ladies and... who am I kidding? There are no ladies here. Ha 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 ha. Laughter echoed throughout the large hall. Hello, gentlemen. It's an honor to be with you this evening. Rapturous applause followed. It's good to be back among my people. So often I feel I'm among strangers, but here we all understand each other, don't we? 1,500 men hung on every single word. And it's good, because too often the world doesn't understand us. Have you ever felt misunderstood, abused, disrespected? They nodded like puppets on the same string. Especially by women, flaunting their bodies, taunting us, then rejecting us whenever we approach them, laughing at us, mocking us. But no more will you be ignored, underappreciated, mistreated, because I'm here to share the secret to making any woman you want yours. I'm sure this'll be good. You could have heard a pin drop in that hall. First, insult her. You have to knock her down a peg or two without chasing her away. Wow, what a great dress. With better makeup, you'd look fantastic, for example. The key is to offend her, but make her want your approval. They all do, after all, even if they won't admit it. Is this guy being serious? Then you will take her home, and you will rock her world like never before, and then act like she doesn't matter. She'll be so confused, she'll do whatever it takes to keep you coming back. Finally, after she's begged and humiliated herself, you can laugh at her and throw her away, just as you've been laughed at and thrown away, because that's what she deserves. That's what they all deserve. Oh, they were listening like it was all they've been waiting to hear for their entire lives. And it went on and on and on until finally, thankfully, he finished. Congratulations, gentlemen. You're now on your way to living the life you deserve. A toast to our future success. The audience members all drank and then began talking to each other excitedly about how their lives were about to change. If only they knew. Without warning, one man stopped speaking and suddenly reached for his throat. His neighbor reached out to help, but then he grabbed for his own throat as well and fell to the floor, flopping. He was followed by another and another, until every single member of the audience has collapsed to the ground, convulsing back and forth in some macabre choreographed dance. I stepped around them and walked to the stage where the host lay, writhing on his back and foaming at the mouth. I bent down over him. That feeling you have right now, confused, scared, not knowing what's happening or how it all went wrong. That's how Julie felt after you used her and threw her away like trash, right before she took a bottle of pills as she lay in a bathtub. I removed the catering apron and cyanide bottle and dropped them over him as he took his final breath. This is for my sister, you evil fucking bastard. Latchkey Kid. A latchkey kid, or latchkey child, is a child who returns to an empty home after school, or a child who is often left at home with no supervision because their parents are away at work. I related a bit too much to this term growing up. My mother, to put it lightly, wasn't there, and my father preferred just chilling in his man cave to actually being a parent. I, being a naive kid, loved this life. I could bring whoever I wanted home, eat whatever I wanted, and do what I wanted when I wanted. I understand now just how bad it was, but luckily I'm in a better place now. This story happened at the tail end of my middle school career. We got to try planning out our schedules for the next school year, and I was excited to come home and do what I normally did. I got off the bus and walked down the street to my house. I barely put my hand on the door when something caught my attention. It was my dad, and he was humming. I went inside, looking around to see where the sound was coming from. As I got closer to the kitchen, I began to smell something divine. I entered the kitchen, and to my shock, it was my mom and Dad. Dad was reading the paper, and Mom was cooking something on the stove. Now, no smell, no matter how good, could mask the fact that my father and mother were in the same room without fighting. This rang off alarm bells in my head, so I began to feel a bit worried. "Hi, honey, how was school?" my mother asked me. That wasn't my mom. That wasn't her voice. It looked like her. These thoughts and others suddenly filled my head as I took in just how dangerous this situation could be. It was good. We made our schedules for the next school year, I answered, deciding that playing along would be the safest option. "That's good, sport. Come, sit down. Your mother's making some pancakes," the one who looked like my father had said, patting a nearby seat. Sure, just let me put my stuff away first. I figured if I could get to my room, I could sneak out my window and go to the neighbors. All right, hurry back. I rushed to my room, locking the door behind me and pushing my dresser against it for good measure. I then made my way out my window next to my bed, getting it open and making my way out of it. As I was about to close my window, I heard a pounding at my door. "Honey, are you in there?" a female voice asked, rattling my doorknob. "Go away." My door began to shake as the person on the other side began pounding on it again, trying to force it open. I booked it away from my house and went next door, knocking on the door a few times, and when I was greeted by our neighbor, Miss Valentine, she said, "Are you okay, kid? You need to call the police." "What for?" "Something happened to my parents. They're different. It's not them in there." For a moment, it looked like she was going to send me away. But she must have been able to tell that I was being serious, so she let me inside. "Just wait there and I'll be right back," she said. She sat me down in the kitchen and got on the phone. She spoke to the police for a bit, explaining the situation before a knock was heard on the door. She handed me the phone and told me to keep them on the line as she went to answer it. My heart sank as I heard those same voices. "I'm sorry to bother you, but is my daughter with you? She ran away because she didn't like what we made for dinner." "No, she isn't. Sorry. I thought I saw her running up the street a few minutes ago. I was about to call you and see if everything was okay." I tried to keep out of sight as I heard them talk, until I heard the door close. Shortly after, Miss Valentine came back, her face completely devoid of color and her expression blank. "Are the police still on the line?" "Yes, ma'am," I said. "Okay, good." She handed me a knife and kept me close as she spoke to the police a bit longer before hanging up. "The cops will be here in a few minutes. They're going to take you somewhere where you can be safe, okay?" she told me. We both waited on the couch for a while. It was most likely only 10 minutes, but at that moment it felt like an eternity. Every noise freaked me out, because any noise could have been those two strangers trying to get in. After the 10 minutes, the cops knocked on the door, and I was taken to the police station. I was told that the two strangers were caught and arrested for impersonation. They had searched my home and found no trace of my father, suspecting that the two strangers had had something to do with it. I ended up being put into foster care, and I ended up being adopted 2 years later, and that's where I am now. I have not been able to contact my father at all yet, though part of me doesn't want to. I don't know why those people wanted to impersonate my parents, and I can only imagine what would have happened to me if I believed them. Welcome. Our story this time is called Heart of Stone. A shadow fell on a distant land. Harvest failed and rivers ran dry. Livestock died and people vanished. The villagers said a monster had come, a creature that dwelled in the mountains and preyed on their families. The creature must be killed, they said. Men from all over the region took up arms against the creature. They quested up the mountain, searching for the beast. None of them ever returned. Years passed, and then decades. The story of the monster faded to myth. The land remained barren, and the people suffered. There was an old man who still remembered the good years, when his vineyard had been loaded with grapes. Now the withered vines produced little fruit. He blamed the monster for his hardships, and this blame turned to bitter obsession. "Father, you cannot kill it," his son pleaded. "It will change nothing." The father replied, "I must. They say its heart can break the curse." The son shook his head. "No, they say it eats the hearts of men." The next morning he awoke to find his father's bed empty. He cursed himself for not watching his father closer. He saddled his horse and went after him. The old man was far ahead. His horse climbed higher. Low plains gave way to forest. He shivered as he crossed snowy ground, his coat long forgotten. Finally, he reached the ruin. "What do you want?" the creature asked. The old man did not recognize it for what it was. "I'm hunting the monster," he replied. His breath rose in the crisp alpine air. "Not for long," it replied. Too late, the man realized who he dealt with. That night, the creature feasted on the flesh of the old man and drank the hot blood of his heart. The next day, the sun arrived. He found the courtyard empty, except for a dirty, naked child sitting in a circle of bloody snow. "What do you want?" it asked. "My father," the son replied. The child watched him closely. "He is not here," it replied carefully. He knew his father was dead. Still, he felt pity for the child. "Come," he said. "You must be cold. I have another cloak." He bundled up the child, and he built a fire. They faced the crackling flames in silence. After a time, the child said, "I am hungry." The son carefully took a small knife and opened his arm. The child drank its fill. Weakened, the son fell into a deep sleep. When he awoke, he was alone, and the fire was reduced to ash. A small, heart-shaped stone lay in the snow. He pocketed it, thankful to be alive. In the spring, he buried that stone in his father's vineyard. The vines rejuvenated and produced better than they had in decades. He wished his father could have seen it. In the town, they said the curse had been lifted, that the creature had died, or perhaps even never existed at all. The son kept his secret, and at his vineyard he prospered. Today's story, It's Happily Watching. This originally happened a few years ago when I was 13. I've always had insomnia, but slowly it got worse. Every night I would wake up and couldn't go to sleep, but one night I couldn't move. I was frozen, eyes forced open, as if my body wasn't mine anymore. I looked around my room and suddenly I saw it. A creature, easily 8 feet tall. It was pitch black, skin like a void. Its outline was blurry. Its eyes were the worst. 2 white dots just staring at me, unmoving and never blinking. It stood outside my doorframe at first, and all I could do was watch in fear for what felt like days. It had a smile, like its face was torn through with a dull knife. I cried in fear as it just stood there, watching, when I suddenly passed out. The next night wasn't better by any means. I awoke frozen again, too scared to look at my door, but I regretted it the second I did. It was closer. It was inside now. Just like the night before, it stared at me the entire time, adrenaline running through my veins, yet still unable to move a muscle. Every night carried on like this, the demon getting closer. One night, I thought I was safe. I didn't see it standing anywhere, but it wasn't standing. It hung upside down from the ceiling, like a spider. Its arms and legs bent in horrid ways, and its neck twisted so it could still face me. This night, I was able to close my eyes, but at this point I was too scared to. What if it moved when I closed my eyes? What happens then? The final night, I felt myself wake up, but refused to open my eyes. I was terrified of what I would see. I couldn't prepare myself for what I would end up seeing, though. I slowly opened my eyes, only to start having a panic attack. It stood by me, right next to the bed. I could see it up close, and I wish that I had never opened my eyes. It was so thin I could see its bones, but its skin looked like leather. Black ooze spilled out of its mouth, smiling down at me. I fought harder that night than I ever have before. I slowly gained control. First, a finger, then a foot, then an arm. Once I was in control, I hid under the blankets, praying for it to leave me alone. Next thing I remember, I was waking up to my alarm. Every night since then, it has stayed away. Maybe because I had control now. I've wondered for years since then what would have happened to me if I didn't force myself to move. If I had just waited one more night. But now I always have a knife by the bed. While I've never seen it fully again like the nights I woke up, I still spot it from time to time in the corner of my eye. My only hope is this never happens to my daughter. But for now, he's still here, always smiling and watching. Our story today is called This Way.
Do you know the first rule they drill into you about wilderness survival? Never panic. But that's easier said than done, no matter how seasoned you think you are, no matter the toughness you claim. The moment you realize that you're completely alone, with no clear path home, panic doesn't just creep in, it floods you. The true test lies not in avoiding this terror, but in mastering the art of regaining your composure once fear has taken hold. I was 11 years old then, on a week-long trip to Havasupai with my church group sometime in August. I never really believed in anything they talked about on Sundays, but I was from a poor family, and they always paid for my trips. Of course, I didn't know that at the time. In fact, I wouldn't have had much of a childhood if it had not been for them. If you've never been to Havasupai, I do hope I'm pronouncing that anywhere near how it's supposed to. Imagine this. After trekking a grueling half-marathon through a sun-blasted, arid expanse of the Grand Canyon, you stumble upon an untouched paradise of rivers and waterfalls. A verdant oasis that defies the desolate landscape around it. Look it up. Pictures can't do it justice, but some can come close. But I digress. The hike there is a downward trek of 10 miles. Naturally, the return is its uphill counterpart. Picture this, a slightly pudgy 11-year-old me trudging uphill 10 miles in 90-degree heat. It was manageable, though, as long as we stayed in our groups. We were a few dozen strong, so those of us who were slower started in front. Fatigue set in quickly, and I fell back to the next group. Another 20 minutes, and I dropped back again. Each step a growing struggle. The trail was a ribbon between towering stone walls carved by creeks over millennia, with other stretches laid bare beneath the unforgiving sun. The foliage cleared away. I can't pinpoint exactly how it happened. I was staring at my feet, the soft thud of my water bottle against my thigh marking each step, my mind adrift in a sea of fatigue and heat. When I looked up, I found myself in a clearing. The path I had been following vanished, replaced by the random scatter of sagebrush under the harsh sun. I backtracked, hoping that I could find the trail, but it was as if it had evaporated. Panic set in, tears streaming down my face as I broke into a desperate sprint. After a minute, the trail was still nowhere in sight. I turned, running, screaming for help, but my voice was swallowed up by the vastness of the canyon. My heart was a drumbeat against my chest, my mouth dry as I looked at the 1/4 of a liter of water left in my bottle. Just a few sips left. I was gonna die. That was the only thought in my mind. I ran in another direction, my voice hoarse as I screamed again. Help! Help! I pushed on for minutes that felt like hours, but there was nothing, only the relentless, hot, desolate landscape stretching out endlessly around me. The sun bore down, turning the canyon into a furnace, the heat mirroring the mounting hysteria in my mind. I looked around the vast canyon, what looked like miles in any direction. I looked for any sign of life, any dots of trekkers on the rim, anything. But there was nothing. It was around 2 p.m., and the sun wasn't going down anytime soon. In my desperation, I cried out for God to please save me. But still, silence. To be honest, "I'm going to die" wasn't a coherent thought in my head. It was more primal than that, a visceral sensation that grips you. Those who have felt it know what I mean. It's not about thinking in words. It's about experiencing a raw, unfiltered surge of dread. Panic is the essence of fear, a state where planning and logic are drowned out by an overwhelming wave of despair. I collapsed onto the scorched earth, feeling the sting of the hot sand against my hands and knees. My tears fell, disappearing almost instantly as they met the ground, a poignant symbol of my fleeting life being consumed by the unforgiving soul of the desert. As I sat there, a small but vibrant splash of color caught my eye. A red bird, flitting from one parched tree to another. It was the first sign of life I had seen in what felt like an eternity. The sight of it sparked a flicker of hope in my heart. Perhaps, I thought, this bird knows where to find some water. Driven by a mix of desperation and instinct, I followed the bird. It seemed almost aware of my presence, waiting for me from branch to branch. My pace quickened. My eyes locked on this beacon of red against the bleached sky. The bird led me through a less trodden path, dotted with the occasional greenery that managed to survive in this harsh environment. And then, ahead, I saw something. Or rather, someone. There was a Native American man sitting on a fallen log, the red bird perched calmly on his shoulder. He looked up as I approached, his eyes meeting mine with a depth and understanding that was almost unsettling. "Are you lost?" he asked, his voice gentle, echoing strangely in the vast silence of the canyon. I could only nod, wiping away the tears and dust that clung to my face, trying to steady my breath. "Then rejoice, for you have been found," he said. His tone was so warm. I stood there, the awkwardness clinging to me like the heat. "Can you help me find the trail?" I managed to ask, my voice hoarse from all of the screaming. "You're already on a trail," he replied with a gentle smile. "But it's not my trail," I protested. "It is a trail, and it's the one that you're on," he countered. I was confused. The raw fear that clouded my mind had begun to subside, and I felt clear thoughts slowly coming back to me. I need to find my group," I insisted. "The group that left you to die in this heat?" he snapped back, his tone suddenly sharp. "Seems like they're the ones that need to find you." His words stung as I realized the truth in his statement. I swallowed hard, trying to gather my thoughts. The man's eyes lingered on me for a moment, then he nodded slowly. "I can help you find your way home, but you must listen carefully. Follow the echo of my voice, and you will be safe." I knew it was strange, but it was only my opinion, so I simply nodded in agreement. He stood up from the log, the red bird fluttering to a nearby branch. Watching intently, he cupped his hands around his mouth and called out, his voice ringing around through the air. "This way." I walked for what felt like hours, through rocky terrain and across sun-scorched patches of desert. The red bird was my only guide, hopping ahead, then pausing to make sure that I was still following. The familiar echo sounded intermittently, "This way," drawing me forward. The canyon twisted and wound around itself, and I felt disoriented. But the bird remained steady. I scrambled over loose stones, ducked beneath overhanging branches, and navigated through narrow passageways as the sun bore down relentlessly. At one point, The bird perched atop a barren tree, and I heard the echo again. This way. Faint, but clear. I followed, feeling a sting of sand against my cheeks as the wind picked up. My throat was parched, and my legs ached. But I pushed on. The bird led me to a small clearing surrounded by towering canyon walls. For a moment, I thought I was still lost, but then I heard the distant voices of my group. Brandon! Brandon! The group turned as one and ran towards me, relief washing over their faces. They hugged me, patting my back, and bombarded me with questions. Where were you? We were so worried. Thank God you're safe. Warmth spread through my chest as I looked around at their familiar faces. I was overwhelmed with relief and gratitude. They handed me water and snacks, and I quickly gulped them down. The leaders fussed over me, checking for signs of heat exhaustion. You're going to be okay, one of them said reassuringly. I smiled and nodded, feeling a sense of safety for the first time in several hours. I sat down on a rock, letting the cool breeze wash over me as the group gathered around, chatting and laughing. But just as I was about to speak, I heard a whisper on the wind. This way. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I have to go, I stammered, backing away. The leader's voice deepened. You're not going anywhere. In that moment, I heard the whisper again, urgent and clear. This way. I spun around and bolted, shoving past the clawing hands and running towards the ridge. I could hear them behind me, their voices rising in a cacophony of shrieks and howls. I glanced back once and saw the group standing in a line at the edge of the clearing, their faces twisted in anger, their eyes burning with a malevolent glow. They watched me with predatory intent, their laughter echoing through the canyon. I ran faster, my breath coming in ragged gasps, until I heard the voice again, closer this time. This way. The red bird fluttered ahead, guiding me through the twisting paths of the canyon. I followed, barely daring to look back, until I stumbled upon a familiar part of the trail. I recognized the marker stones and the way the path curved around a large boulder. Ahead, I saw another group of people, and my heart leapt with relief when I recognized the faces of my real friends. They looked up as I approached, their expression a mix of shock and joy. Brandon, there you are, one of the leaders cried, rushing to me and wrapping me in a tight hug. We were so worried. I got lost, I managed to say, tears welling up in my eyes as I looked around at the familiar faces. But I'm okay now. The group gathered around me, offering water and snacks and fussing over me with genuine concern. As I sat down to rest, I noticed the red bird perched on a nearby tree branch, watching silently. I smiled and gave a small nod of gratitude. The bird chirped softly and flew away, disappearing into the bright blue sky. I listened carefully for the voice, but all I heard was the laughter and chatter of my friends. The canyon was still, and for the first time since I had gotten lost, I felt truly safe. It's been 20 years since that day, and honestly, I'd almost forgotten about it. Life moved on, and the memories of that canyon faded away into the hazy backdrop of childhood. But every now and then, something happens that brings it all rushing back. Last week, I got a message from Mark, one of my old friends from the church group. He figured we should catch up over a few drinks at the local bar. I hadn't spoken to him for ages, but I figured it would be nice to reconnect. The bar was dimly lit, and Mark was already sitting at the table in the corner when I arrived. He hadn't changed much, still the same lanky frame, still laughing too loudly at his own jokes. He greeted me with a firm handshake and a grin. "Brandon, long time no see, my friend. How have you been?" "Not bad," I replied, smiling. "How are you?" We exchanged small talk for a good long while, reminiscing about old times and filling in the gaps of the years that had passed. He seemed warm and genuine, but there was something off about his eyes, something intense and unsettling. After a few drinks, Mark leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Hey, do you remember that camping trip to Havasupai?" "Yeah, of course. It's hard to forget that one." A smile flickered across his lips. "We were all so worried when you were gone. But you weren't really lost, were you?" "What do you mean?" I asked, feeling a chill creep up my spine. He chuckled softly and leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving mine. "Sometimes the ones who get lost don't really get to come back." I nervously shifted in my seat and took a sip of my drink before changing topics. A few minutes later, he suggested we check out his new car. He seemed quite proud of it, so I obliged. We put on our jackets and headed out into the cold night. The wind bit at my face as we turned down an unlit alley towards the parking lot. Mark walked ahead of me, humming softly, his breath visible in the frigid air. As we approached the lot, I glanced up and noticed a red bird perched atop a stoplight, its bright plumage stark against the darkness. It cocked its head to the side and chirped softly. Then I heard it, faint but unmistakable, carried on the wind. "This way." Well, he was lost and then found by something. Then he was really found. Now it seems he might have been found again. Perhaps you can never truly escape that dread that he spoke of. But what did you think of this one? Let me know in the comments. I thank you for stopping by and listening. I do hope that you'll stop in again to listen to more Frail Blaze tales. Oh, and subscribe already. Sweet dreams.